First I want to just kind of introduce the book and maybe have you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the book without too many spoilers, and I will do the same. Even though all I want to do is talk to you about spoilers, I will behave
Okay.
myself tonight.
All right. That sounds great. Well, where's my reading copy? There's about 20 copies of this book in this
Oh,
office,
I'm sure.
but there's only one that's like the special reading copy. Um, I feel like I should have prepared for this.
Okay.
Um, so this is Big Chief. Big Chief is uh, ostensibly about a power struggle on a indigenous reservation up in northern Wisconsin. It takes place during the reelection campaign for Mack Beck, who is a young tribal president who has started out idealistically, but kind of loses his way. Um, it's told from the perspective of Mitch Caddo, which is his best friend from childhood. Mitch is kind of the right hand man to the thing, but they are locked in a reelection campaign, and they pull out all the stops to hold on to the power that they have. And it's about politics again ostensibly, but I think it became more about belonging. Belonging to a community, belonging to a place, and trying to reforge connections that may have been lost to the past. That's the jacket
I
copy.
love it. I love it, and it's a good intro. I hope everybody checks this book out because I mean, you can't really exist in North America in some capacity without politics affecting you. So I think
Exactly.
this
Yeah.
was, for me, a really interesting, both, I guess you would call it a sliding door book in that I could sort of learn a lot, but also step into it because of my own lived experiences. So, from that perspective, I was really grateful to read about it. And I'm wondering if you can tell us, what propelled this story out of you? What inspired it?
Well, first of all, it's really nice to hear that it's landing like that. Like
Mhm.
it's really it's one of those things that you hope for when you put a book out in the world, that people will reconnect, will connect with it. Aside from just the immediate community, like indigenous readers or non-indigenous readers, I was hoping that people would find something in it like that. I've always been interested in the politics of that happen on reservations.
Hmm.
They occupy a certain space, because they are sovereign entities unto themselves, but they are also very small. Usually uh, the size of municipal elections or county elections. Um, but there's so much importance on it, on these elections, and because it's so small, they tend to be very personal. People bring their own personal grudges into them, and the political warfare that happens between the parties is usually very, immediate and as I said, personal. Uh, I am enrolled as a citizen with the Lac du Flambeau Band of Chippewa Indians up in northern Wisconsin, and we watch what happens up there. I'm usually unable to vote because we don't have absentee voting. So the idea kind of grew from feeling powerless as these things that had effect on my life were going on. So I just wrote into it. It took a while to find the characters. It took a while to find the actual action of it, the urgency of it. But that's where we got
Yeah.
here. So,
I'm obviously not as well versed with you as you, with tribal politics and the sort, but I have, understood it to be almost a tertiary layer of regulation in the United States
yeah,
or in, I guess, North America, in that there's, at least in the US, there's, the federal government that oversees whatever it is they're doing these days. Then there's state, local, municipalities, but then there's also, because you're sovereign land, that overlay. And so there's this
yeah,
push and pull. I know I don't want to give too much away, but the there's kind of this outsider force in your book with, the FBI and
Hmm.
other government entities that are, I would say, looming on the outskirts of this story.
Yeah.
And they kind of interject. And, I'm wondering like, how did you develop that dynamic within this book? Because
Mhm.
that push and pull feels very important and relevant to this sort of story to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's inherent in the subject, I think, because there's so much interaction between tribal governments and federal and state governments, um, especially with the Department of the Interior,
Mm-hmm.
the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which falls under that purview. Um, so yeah, I think that it was, if I'm writing about this subject, it's kind of unavoidable,
Yeah.
and on a certain level, um, I almost didn't want to take it into that direction, and but I think it was necessary in order to show the stakes. These are two the two main characters, the ones we spend the most with. They're young men who have found themselves at the seat of power,
Mm-hmm.
and again, interacting with the federal and state governments. Um, just holding on to a lot of power. And yeah, it just sort of came up naturally, I think.
Yeah, I want to talk about one of the. I have to say, one of the main characters is not the most likable fellow in the world.
Yeah.
But
I
I want
hear
to
this
talk
a
about the
lot.
one
Yeah.
that I was very drawn to, which is Mitch.
Uh-huh.
He is both an insider and an outsider. In that,
Yeah.
you learn very quickly in the story that he has um, gone to law school outside of, the sort of tribal boundaries, if you will, and he's come back. I believe he also has a native mother who has passed away,
Yep.
and his father is white, and there, was, for lack of a better word, not super present in his kind of immediate life.
Absent.
And
Yes.
so,
Yes.
you know, as somebody who's a complete outsider to native and indigenous life, that was my in, if you will. I could
Okay.
sort of get to a lot of the struggles through Mitch because of his perspective, both in and out of the reservation and the casino. That's also I would say another main character, if you will.
Right. Yeah.
Can you talk about that, like, this dialogue for so many of us? Just understanding what that means, like what is identity? That's really deeply discussed in this book, and
Mhm.
I would love to hear your words on it.
They're preoccupied with surfaces. A lot of the characters. That again, it's something that seemed to naturally come up when talking about politics,
Yeah.
but also in terms of how somebody quote unquote fits in on a reservation, let's say. And I think the first, I mean, we got the visual, right? The visual, how somebody looks, but just as important, if not more, is how somebody talks.
Mm.
And what language do they speak? Um, and Mitch is an outsider in that, like, he didn't really grow up there. He was there when he was a kid. Um, but I think that he finds himself at a loss when he's trying to talk to people who have lived there their whole lives. But his superpower is that he is a lawyer, right? He speaks the language of power. So that's what he brings to the table in this case. Mac is somebody that it's more natural for him, to speak, as a politician, but also to speak as like another person who lives there. And then, of course, there's the an indigenous language
Yes.
that is still spoken. Certainly not as much, something that they're trying to revive. But that's also another factor, like how much of the language do you know? How much can you communicate with the ancestors? How much do you understand the importance of ceremony, the importance of the rituals? So yeah, that became very apparent. I'm paying attention to how people are talking, at every juncture. of the book because it is the determinant.
Yeah, and I appreciated that you had indigenous language well, I guess translated into English characters
Yeah,
built
yeah,
into the book, and there was no translation, and I loved it because I think
yeah,
it's so much more immersive when I feel like this is something I need to pay attention to and learn from versus
yeah.
it is spoon fed to me. So,
I resisted some of that,
oh, really?
in
Can
the
you talk a
in the
little bit
editing.
about that?
Uh, you hear all, different opinions about how to present something that's like that, because Anishinaabe, that's the language,
Yes. Yep.
Anishinaabe. It's not, widely known. I think people might be familiar with it in place names. If you're from Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, there are a lot of places that are Anishinaabe words. Um, so when it got to the editing stage, yeah, there were a few instances where the editor or the copy editor were like, well, what does this mean? We should, spell this out. And I opted for context clues. I was just trying to make sure
Yeah.
that, people weren't completely lost about it, but I also did not want to break up the flow of the narrative
Right.
by dictionary definitions and that sort of thing.
Yeah. No, I always appreciate it when an author does not hand me every key to the kingdom, and like the
Yeah.
little bit of struggle is good, and it made for a much richer read in my
Yeah.
opinion. So
Yeah, and
appreciate
it had
that.
to
And
be
thank
the,
you for doing that.
yeah. Oh, you are welcome. Yes.
um, I wanna talk about Mac because um, I don't like him.
That's
He
valid.
is not a lovable teddy bear of a person.
No, no, he is not.
He is rough around the edges. I think he's very smart. It's very clear in this book that he's street smart, whereas
Yeah,
Mitch is book smart and is kind of tagging along, and I think the two of them colliding is what makes the book really interesting for me.
yeah.
But how, like, maybe for anybody that's watching or will be watching in the replay, how do you channel unlikability in your writing? Like, you made him such a deeply challenging character to root for, and I would love
Yeah.
to hear more.
I mean, in the previous drafts, I mean, I think that he was probably even less likable. I think one of the challenges, that I'd set for myself was taking this um, antagonistic character and finding, where's he coming from? Because I don't think anybody in the book is purely good or purely
Mm-hmm.
evil. That was important for me to like say, like I may have an antagonist, but you hopefully see something recognizable in Mac as a character was always surprising to me, because he steals the
He,
scene. I mean, he might not
he
be,
does.
he might not be doing the likable things, and he like you said, rough around the edges. um he's dismissive of people. He's arrogant, and he is also, of the belief that he is the one that's, going to save the people somehow. And that's not easy to get into. I can understand that. But there is a reason, right? There is some, very hidden hurt, pain that he is going through. Um, but as a character, uh, in the early drafts, he would show up and he would say things, and I'd be like, "Who's this guy?" Because he wasn't as prominent as, believe it or not, he was not as prominent.
Oh,
Um, yeah, yeah. Over time, like he started to just,
he emerged.
take over. Yeah,
Wow.
he just started, and every time it was like, I just need to stay with him a little bit longer to see what he's going to say. And eventually it was like, okay, this guy is one of the main characters.
Oh,
He's the one
that's
in
so
charge.
interesting.
Yeah.
He's
Um,
so driven by power.
yeah.
Um, but I don't always, and what I love about him is he's morally gray. So you don't actually know, does he want the power for the power's sake? Does he deep down believe that he really can do good in this, community, and or is it just he's in it for himself? And
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
watching that unfold throughout the book was really satisfying to me.
He's working on a few resentments and things that the chip on the shoulder that he's working off resentments with his adopted father, Joe, who's
Mm-hmm.
very important in the tribe, as you see in the book. Um, and also, just that overall sense of being, in charge of a tribe that's working with the government as well. So like there's the immediate father, and then there's the paternalistic sort of figure of the United States government,
Mm-hmm.
kind of working in tandem there. And that's the thing, is that he does unlikable things. He does things that are questionable morally. Um, but the hope is that the reader sees that he's living underneath these kind of twin oppressions,
Yeah.
and he's acting out in accordance to that. So it's meant to be complicated, and I'm like I said, it's one of those things I hope comes through.
I mean, I sat with this book for a while after I finished it because it just turned in my head, and every time I would think of it, I would, a new scene would emerge that I would zero in on.
Yeah,
And I think, Mac is just he's complicated, and like you've just described. Um, but I ultimately think, he's up for
yeah,
reelection, right? Just
yeah.
it's not a spoiler, folks. I promise. It's known pretty quickly.
It's very
Uh,
beginning. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, very beginning, and he had his opponent, a woman named Gloria, is I would say just as complicated, but masks her ambitions a little bit better than Mac, and so
yeah.
you have this kind of push and pull of the women in the book are very interesting the way they are fleshed out, because maybe it's because I'm a woman and I could sort of sympathize or empathize with them a little bit more, but they just have this different um, vibe between the two, and I
Yeah.
think you watch Mac get a little bit ruffled by all of that. You can see that it bothers him, and he then uses his existing influence or power to do some complicated things, in my opinion.
That was
And
that was one of those surprises as I was writing, was that there's like a dynamic there between Mitch and Mac, which is, they have a friendship that is very rooted in this toxic masculinity.
mhm.
And
Oh, interesting.
yeah, yeah, that's what I recognized after a little bit. Like the things keeping them together, and the things they do to get along with each other. Just the way they talk, and just the attitudes they have. Um, it it really read as this sort of outdated, toxic masculinity, and out of a deep sort of insecurity. And Gloria, who is somewhat of a celebrity, like as like an activist, somebody who's well known outside the reservation, but somebody who has very definite ambitions. She's a challenge to them in that regard, and yeah, part of the book is seeing how that threatens them, I guess. And yeah.
And did that come out of, deep research? Did that come out of kind of personal observations on your part as far as political dynamics just in general? Can you talk a bit more about that?
I don't feel like I researched it all that much. I feel like that was one of those,
Yeah.
observations that you make, not just, in tribal politics, but in politics in
Yeah.
general. We
Well,
just had a dynamic like that in an
mm,
election that might have happened back in November.
yeah,
Um,
but I don't know what you're talking about.
yeah, yeah, yeah. What could I be alluding
What could
to?
that
But
be? What could that be about?
yeah, that dynamic, I think, is very, unfortunately very pervasive. I'm not, breaking any ground saying something like that, but I think that it just sort of comes from the observations of what's happening, um and the character, observing, who the characters are, where they come from, and what is the thing that makes it possible for them to carry on in the day to day when they feel so threatened and insecure.
Hmm.
Like uh, you take it out on people who probably don't deserve it.
Yeah. Well, certainly there's quite a few intense scenes in this book that explore that quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I guess along the same lines, another theme that I pulled out of the book that I hope other readers will too is, this the we talked about this earlier, money and power,
Yeah.
and kind of that grab for both for altruistic or otherwise purposes. Can you talk a bit about like what prompted you to explore those themes and topics within the story?
I think that this was a story that I hadn't really seen all that much and I'm talking about the angle of let's say socioeconomic status.
Hmm.
You know, there's a lot of really good stories, novels, poems, short stories, all that stuff, um, concerning indigenous communities. But I also feel like, it's not as explored as like, the differences, like socioeconomic differences. And that's the thing that, sets Mitch, apart from, Mac, let's say that, um, they have different attitudes, and it's really strange, right? Because like the way that Mac grew up kind of privileged, but he
Hmm.
still thinks of himself as from the streets, and from the mean streets of the reservation, whereas like Mitch has grown up kind of itinerant with his mother. They traveled around a lot when he was a kid.
Yeah.
Not a lot of money, but he also went to law school.
Right.
He carries himself like he's like higher, so like they're both like like living off of these sorts of images of themselves, uh, and it's all crossed over. So I didn't see. I've never seen that dynamic as much,
Hmm.
and I was, as soon as it emerged, I got very excited. I was like, okay, now we're gonna
Yeah.
see
I've
how
never
that
read
plays
anything
out.
like that as well. I
Yeah,
was, um, you know, Mitch, this is not an exact comparison, but reminds me a little bit of the main character in Morgan Talty's Fire
yeah,
Exit. I'm not sure if
yeah,
that's
yeah,
crossed
yeah.
your path yet,
Oh
but
yeah, definitely, yeah,
that sort of outsider looking in perspective. They're very different characters. Do not get me
yeah,
wrong,
yes,
but
yes, yes,
I I appreciate what you just said about having the perspective of socioeconomic privilege or lack thereof,
yeah,
because that's I think hopefully a lot of people will pick up on that too now.
yeah, yeah. There's money coming into this reservation, this fictional reservation, and everybody's kind of going for their slice of the pie there. But not everybody, they're not starting at the same level,
Right.
right? They're not starting with the same advantages. So that was something that was important, for me, to explore, is like how money does determine, uh, where these characters are coming from.
And there's also a bit of a backdrop of a casino, which is another
Yep.
kind of area where money exchanges hands
Oh
in
yeah.
maybe not the most equitable way all the time, right? That's just as a not necessarily that casino, but just casinos in general, right? The house always wins.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Something that stuck into my mind, when I was doing research years ago, this has been a years
of
long process,
course.
so there's been a lot of research, was that there was this fact that basically said that, like in places that have that casino, the cage, where all the money is counted and, the exchange, uh, is often like the biggest financial institution on in the community, right? um, because of, just the sheer amount of money that's changing hands, going back and forth, and yeah, it's. I feel like one of those sorts of maybe stereotypes that, people work off of, because the Indian casino, and I haven't seen a lot of stuff out there engage with that, maybe in a non-stereotypical way,
Hmm.
or in a way that adds to your knowledge. So that was my intention there.
Oh, that's interesting. I mean,
Yeah.
it's such a double standard in at least in the United States that you know casinos on sovereign tribal soil are kind of characterized one way, but then there's an entire city called Las Vegas that,
Yeah.
frankly, is not really different in its problems in that perspective, and so that's
Yeah, that
somehow
exactly.
this glamorous vacation spot, and so that push and pull is really I hope people that read this really pull those little details out, because that's what felt so meaningful to me as a reader,
Yeah.
is what is this comparison to kind of US soil, if you will, and you use that in air quotes.
Yeah, right. I mean,
Where is that inequity trickling down?
exactly. Yeah, yeah. Because I mean, that's really what it's always been a double-edged sword. In my observations and in my research, and seeing how these things play out. It's that double-edged sword of, like, it's bringing money into the community, and the tribes are able to do a lot of good with it,
Mm-hmm.
fund schools, tribal housing, a lot of the things that need to be funded uh, weren't before they had this advantage. But the other side of it is that it's still a casino,
Mm-hmm.
and it's with all its attendant problems, and gambling addiction, or just petty crime, that sort of thing. Um, so yeah, again, I didn't see a lot of stuff out there engaging with that, because I don't have any answers to that. I was, because, like, you can't just, like, completely dismiss it,
Right.
if it's doing good, um, but yeah, definitely
It's
it's
that's a really, I
something.
mean, that's a very complicated topic as far as what is doing good and versus this is harm, and is it, not to speak out of turn, but is it really solving the problems that the U.S. government has created over 300-400 years?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Is,
yeah.
is it is that enough, or is it just a band-aid? Is there more dialogue that's needed? And you sort of see it through all these characters and what their needs are. They emerge in a way that hopefully gives people thought.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I'm curious if you can talk about how the title came to be, and was it your title? Did it come out of marketing, or?
Well, it's my title.
Oh, interesting. Okay,
I'm very, very happy with the title.
can you talk about it? Because I was, it has a lot of layers to it to me.
It does, and there are some elements of it that came from earlier drafts, uh, but I think, if you're looking at the cover too, that there is a sort of iconography. Yeah, there you go, right there. I joke often about how, when I was a writer, coming up and learning how to do this, I figured that whenever I had a book come out, there'd be a feather on the cover.
Oh,
And I,
I love that.
and I decried it. I decried it. I was like, they're just, they don't know how to market, books by indigenous authors other than putting feathers on them.
Mm.
Um, but it's there.
But this is such a
Yeah,
modern cover.
it's
It's
a
so
modern cover.
modern.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think, when you look closely at it, um, first of all, it was a small miracle. This is the first cover they sent me. Um,
Wow, that's so rare.
it is very rare, and I loved it, from the beginning, and everybody I showed it to loved it. We made some tweaks to it, but yeah, what you see is basically what they sent. Um, I like how, we're taking things that are somewhat familiar, or maybe over familiar, um, and juxtaposing against, things that are, um, I don't know, not quite, maybe profane in some ways. On the covers, card suits, right?
Yeah.
Mixed with the, icon, more traditional, icons like the Thunderbird, and the bear. But Big Chief, I think, again, it's me playing with, an outdated, like you think of like Bugs Bunny
Hmm.
cartoons, the way they used to
So offensive. Ugh.
depict us. Yes, yes, in another time. Um, and Big Chief is the name of the car, is the
Yep.
name of the truck that they drive around in. But also, that is how Mac sees himself.
Hmm.
You know, and it's his way of kind of co-opting, this cartoonish, kind of exaggerated, idea of himself, and he tries to embody that as well. So yeah, I did mean for a couple of things to come through, and again, it was like one of those things where I hope the irony is apparent, you know,
Yeah,
because it felt kind of provocative a little bit to name it Big Chief, but it's been Big Chief,
that's
for
awesome.
most of its existence. Yeah,
We
yeah,
always
and when
hear
I
about authors who came up with a completely different title, and the marketing department said, no, no, thank you. We're going to kind of go a different way. So I'm
yeah, yeah.
delighted to hear that your vision made it all the way to the cover.
Yes, yeah. No, working with Simon and Schuster, the team over there, it was, I couldn't dream of it going any better.
That's great.
I think, just like with the title, with the cover, with the edits, the direction that I wanted to go with the book, it's just never ran into any, resistance.
That's great.
Yeah.
I have one more question, and then I want to do a quick, fun lightning round
Yeah,
with you.
all right.
Yay.
All right. Lightning round.
Lightning round, but first, one more question about the book. I feel like a character that is not explicitly described in this book is winter and sort of the cold
Ah,
weather and the like. I felt cold when I read it. That I believe it or not, I felt it, and
mhm.
I'm wondering, and also the time period is so condensed. This book
Yeah.
is expansive in that you get so much of their stories, but condensed in that it takes place in a very short amount of time.
Yeah.
And that's more for the people watching this than it is for your benefit. But
Yeah. Yeah.
like, talk about how the setting played an important role, or how you felt it influenced the story.
The winter setting in particular, uh I think that it really conformed to Mitch's sense, because he is going through this physical affliction, due to all of this, moral quandaries that he finds himself in. He calls it the shiver, and
Yes.
it made sense that it comes out, in that winter time. I've lived in San Francisco for 16 years.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of time. I was just, counting the years recently. I was like, what happened? Um, and that was, before that, I was in, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and New York State, upstate. So I had a lot of winters, before I
Mm,
showed up here.
you sure did.
And yeah, and I've almost forgotten what it felt like. So I think that it was interesting, kind of channeling those feelings. Where are you, by
I'm
the
in New
way?
York City.
You're in New York City.
Yeah, and I
Okay, so
actually left San Francisco 16 years ago.
oh wow,
It
okay,
wasn't because you were arriving, I
okay,
promise. It
good.
was
You didn't hear the
no, I
advance.
didn't hear the
Yeah,
rumblings. I
that's good.
moved for work. But yeah, now
Completely
I'm in New
unrelated.
York City,
Yeah.
and the reason this book hits so close to home for me is we are, you may have heard, we have a local mayoral election going on here
Oh,
in New York City that's quite heated, and I can't help but think of your characters in this setting and in my city at the same time. So that was another
well,
reason this connected for me.
to to not spoil anything, that they're trying to do to him, uh Mamdani, they're trying to essentially do what they do to a character in the book.
Yeah.
which was just
You're a
hate it when
prophet.
books become prescient. I mean, obviously,
Yeah.
obviously, I claim no clairvoyance here, but it was interesting. I saw that you know similar things are happening in the real world. So but the point was that they're just asking about I think winter, and I
Hmm.
remember all those winters when I was younger, and you get to April, May, and you're like, I get through that. I don't live through February and March. Just that um, uh, abject desolation. It felt like. I'm probably being dramatic. It was
Hmm.
probably not as bad, but like,
No.
now the distance has happened, so I don't remember exactly, but it felt like um, on that soul level, just Mitch as the main character is adrift
Hmm.
and, spiritually desolate. So the cold of the winter made sense to illustrate that.
Yeah. I mean, I actually believe if you had set this in the summertime when the sun is shining and it's, beautiful out, that you might have had a different outcome with the characters.
It might have been
Um,
different. Yes.
I kind of was thinking about that. I was thinking, oh, it was a nice blue sky and no snow. How would this story change? And I'm
Not
glad you
too
didn't.
hot,
I'm
not
glad
too
it's sad in
cold. Yeah.
winter.
Yeah. That was the only thing that made sense to me. So
Yeah. It's great. I want to pause and just tell anybody that's watching, like, please go run and get this book. It's so freaking good. It's so good.
thank you.
Um, okay, I have some lighthearted lightning round questions for you.
All right.
So they're all sort of writing based, writing books related. Um, what is your favorite snack to eat when you're in the writing zone?
Oh, that's a really good one. I feel like I'm very careful not to get crumbs in the
Hmm.
keyboard. So it's usually um, I guess I've been really into Haribos lately.
Oh, okay, good.
There's
Any
we have
particular flavor?
uh, I don't know, they're all in German. So
Yeah, yeah,
like
fair.
I'm trying to remember what it's called, but it's like the yogurty ones,
Oh
like
yeah. Whichever
yeah,
one's like the
yeah.
closest bag is probably the one I would pick. Like, what's on my desk? That's
Yes, yes. There's a corner store right over here, so I have, free access to,
nice,
you know,
nice.
all of
Okay,
those.
that's a solid snack. I love it. Do you find yourself to be an early bird writer, or do you like to write at night?
I alternate, um,
Hmm.
and there's no rhyme or reason to it. Like sometimes it just feels like I have to get it done at night, and sometimes I feel like when the kids are at school, I have two kids. Um, I have to do it all when they're at school.
Sure.
So I feel like I write it in the day, and then I edit at night.
Oh, okay. I love that.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. What is the single best piece of advice that you've ever received from, a fellow author?
Uh, I've been very blessed to have lots of author friends who've been,
Yes, and we won't
willing
single
to
them
give me the
out.
advice. We don't have to, but they know who they are. Uh, a lot of it was that tour stuff, like being on tour, and they were all like, make sure you have snacks, just like
Yeah.
on hand, because you just never know when you're going to eat it. So it was like getting married a little bit.
Yes. Yes.
Traveling around, the country to do these events. Um, but and I had that same advice, just remember to eat. Make sure that
Make sure
you.
you eat.
Yeah. Make
How
sure you take
was
care
the
of
tour
yourself.
for you? This wasn't on my lightning round question, but since you mentioned it, how are readers um, engaging with the book in ways that you maybe didn't imagine?
I was, yeah, as you pointed out, I was fortunate enough to have a pretty extensive tour.
Yep.
All of April, pretty much was, just traveling around and doing events. Um, I was afraid a little bit, because when you write about this subject, I do know people who are involved in tribal government, who have worked for them or run for office, that sort of thing, family, friends. Um, I was afraid of that moment where you go to the event and like somebody that's been on tribal council like calls you out and says, this book is just garbage, But I think I think what was interesting was that I kept on running into people who, would come up and they would introduce themselves and like, I'm on council at, this reservation or this place, this nation. Um, and I was like, okay, here it comes, like I've finally been found out. And then they're like, yeah, this is a lot like how it actually goes. And I'm like, I'm sorry to hear that, but
Yeah,
I'm also, glad that I captured something essential about it.
yeah,
Um, because, it's not a nonfiction book. It's not, meant to be like a comprehensive, snapshot of how tribal governments
right.
are. In some ways, it's kind of the cartoonish version. Things are a little exaggerated. So when somebody says, "Yeah, this seems really real and accurate," I'm like, "Oh no."
Oh no.
They're like, yeah, I don't know. We're in a lot more trouble than we think, but
I always I always tell people what no one author is a monolith, and
yeah,
so you need to read a broad spectrum of authors, genres, etc. Because you can't place the weight of anything on one person. That's just not fair.
that's certainly
I
true.
guess unless
It's
it's the
certainly, yeah.
dictionary and then they know every word, and that's fine, right? But otherwise, that's
Well,
not
they
fair.
oughta, yeah, they
Yeah,
oughta,
that's not fair.
yeah.
And my last
Right.
question for you, and again, thank you so much for being so gracious with your time tonight. What are
Mhm.
you reading right now?
Uh, it seemed like a lot of the books got pushed. Like books that might have come out late last year got pushed into the spring. So my book came out around the same time as everybody else's book. So I don't know if I have it like in the back there. There's this
Oh
pile.
my gosh, your
Uh,
reading list is so
those are my
great.
arts.
Very nice.
Yeah, I just did an event with Daria Lavelle, her book Aftertaste,
Mm-hmm.
that came out in May. That was a really fun, soulful read. It's got a killer hook. It's a young man that can conjure spirits based on taste. That's what the
Ooh,
aftertaste
yeah,
means. Yeah, yeah, and that was really interesting. And I just look at my pile over there. Aaron John Curtis, old school Indian. I did an event with him as well.
nice.
That was a really good book. That was
Okay, I'm adding. My list is, you know, uh, millions of books long. I think.
oh,
It's what-
oh yeah, yeah. I don't know how I'm gonna get to these.
It's okay.
Small Ceremonies by Kyle Edwards. Small Ceremonies. That
That's
was
up
a really good
next for
one.
me. I
Is
have
that
it. I
right?
have it on my nightstand right as we speak.
I hope we get to talk to Kyle. Kyle's great.
Oh, I'm well now.
Um,
I will. Now I
yeah,
will. I'm excited.
we kind of we've done a couple of events together. The thing is that we're on the same publisher in Canada, so we often get paired together, and it's kind of funny, just because he's an Anishinaabe
Mm-hmm.
too, but Canadian, so it's different.
Yeah. Well, and
So we
it
kind of kid each other a lot about that.
happens to be Canada's Canada Day that as we're
Yeah,
speaking today, it's
exactly. Yeah.
Canada Day, and
Uh,
I know that there's a lot of reflection that happens now up there, and hopefully
yeah,
we do
definitely.
some of that on July 4th here. So
One can
just
hope.
saying,
Yeah.
anybody watching?
Right, yeah. But yeah, Kyle's great. The small ceremonies, it's polyphonic. It's like, many, many voices. And this Anishinaabe community up in Winnipeg. Uh it's yeah, yeah, definitely different flavor of Anishinaabe, I think.
I'm excited to kind of compare and contrast, but more what I said earlier about no one person is a monolith, and just getting a broader taste.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But yeah, those are top of the pile. There's so many more, and I feel, like I said, everybody's book came out at the same time.
Yes. Well, thank you for
And
growing
so,
our reading list a little bit longer. And for anybody who has not been paying attention this entire time, please go get Big Chief by Jon Hickey. It's so good, you guys. It's just, and then come and talk to me, crawl into my DMs and tell me about how great it is. And I'm very excited and delighted to talk about it. So thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the evening. And thanks to everyone else who has tuned in throughout this chat.
yeah, thank you for this was just great, and I was excited for this, so
Yay!
this
Yay!
couldn't have gone better.